All right, so for the first one, remember we start by isolating our absolute value. It's already isolated, so now we separate it. So x equals 5 and x equals -5. There's two solutions whenever we solve an absolute value. For our second equation, again, it's already by itself. There's no number in front or behind. So my first equation is n minus 3 equals +4. And my second equation is n minus 3 equals -4. Go ahead, solve them both for n. To get your two solutions. Absolute value has two solutions. So n equals 7. And we add 3. Go ahead, type that in your calculator. Type -4 plus 3. And -1. And that's my two solutions. And the last one is a trick question. What do you think my solution is going to be? No solution. Good. Because the absolute value, it cannot equal a negative. That's impossible. So that is no solution. All right, go ahead in your notes. I think we're on page 8. It's either 7 or 8. So go ahead and find these two questions. It's the bottom of the page we started on Friday. Is that page 7 or 8? 7? All right, let's go to page 7, guys, in our packet. Page 7. So before we separate it, we have to isolate. So by isolate, I'm saying we have to get this by itself right here, this box, this absolute value. So the 4 in front, we're going to divide it out. So that gives you the absolute value of 5 plus 3x equals 7. So now we're ready to solve it. Break it apart. Your first equation is 5 plus 3x equals +7. And your second equation is 5 plus 3x equals -7. Let's go ahead and solve them both for x. So there's two answers. So first we subtract 5. So 3x equals 2. And then we divide both sides by 3. So x equals 2/3. And that's my first solution. Now go ahead and do the same 2 steps to solve the second equation. Subtract 5 and divide by 3. So we subtract the 5. So 3x equals negative 12. And then we divide by 3. So my second solution is x equals negative 4. Okay, any questions about how we work through that? So for this next one, what you cannot do is add these together. You cannot add these and get 8. We have to subtract the 6 and then divide the 2. So let's go ahead and do that. Subtract 6. And then divide both sides by 2. So that's the absolute value of negative 4x minus 1 equals 10. And only because this equals a positive 10, we keep going. If this said absolute value of negative 4x minus 1 equals negative 10, then it would be no solution. We would stop working. So let's go ahead and break it apart. Your first equation is negative 4x minus 1 equals a positive 10. Your second equation is negative 4x minus 1 equals negative 10. So let's go ahead and solve it. You're adding 1 and dividing by negative 4 to get your 2 solutions. So my first solution is x equals negative 11 over 4. In my second solution, I'm adding the 1. Dividing by negative 4. Except this time I'm dividing two negatives, so my answer is positive, 9 over 4. And that is my second solution. So homework 2 you got on Friday, and that one is due on Wednesday. So now let's talk about the back side, which is inequalities. So I'm actually going to give you a little simpler rule. So I'm going to have you write the inequalities in this box, how to do that. So this first one is, what do you do if it's a less than inequality? So if it's less than, then you're going to have a between statement. And we're just going to write it as a between statement instead of two separate statements. So when we write it, we just drop our absolute value. See, all I'm doing is rewriting what this is right here. I just got rid of the absolute value. But when it's a less than, we have to add another less than on the left and a negative C. The graph is going to be between two numbers. The answer is between two numbers. So the answer is between two numbers. And the other kind of inequality is greater than. When it's greater than, we have separate. We separate it into two. So my first inequality, I just drop my absolute value. And then the second inequality, I drop my absolute value. And then you're going to flip your inequality to become a less than and change that number to the opposite. So that's the rules that we're going to follow. And we're going to practice that. We're going to do 2 of each, and then we'll end there for today. Tomorrow we'll practice some more. And that's it. So let's go ahead and do our first example. So the first thing we have to figure out is it a greater than or is it a less than? Because we treat greater than differently than a less than. It's totally different the way we're going to treat it. Okay, so when we look at this first example, this is what kind of inequality? Is that a greater than or a less than? Less than, okay. So it's going to fall between two numbers. So what I'm going to do first, just like with an equation, I have to get that absolute value by itself. So I'm going to add that 5. And that gives me the absolute value of 4x minus 8 is less than 16. So because it is between, this is what you're going to do. Anytime it's a less than, I'm just dropping my absolute value. Then on the other side, I want you to put another less than and a negative 16. It should be right there, Glaudy. Right there. It should be right there in your packet. Okay, so when we solve it, we have to add the 8. I have to add it in the middle, on the left, and on the right. So when I add that, that gives me, what's negative 16 plus 8? Negative 16 plus 8. Go ahead and add it in your calculator. Negative 8. Bring down your inequality. 4x is in the middle. And now what's 16, positive 16 plus 8? $24. How do I get rid of this 4 that's being multiplied by x? What's the opposite of because I have to get this x by itself. So what are we going to do to get rid of it? Divide it. Good. I'm dividing by a positive, so I don't flip my inequality. So it's negative 2 is less than x, which is less than 6. So this is my solution. So what this means is that x is between negative 2 and 6. So this means x is between negative 2 and 6. So when you graph it on the number line, we're putting an open circle on -2, an open circle on 6, and then we're shading the part in between. And that is your solution. That's what it looks like. All right, let's look at example 6. That's a greater than. So let's talk about greater than. So for a greater than, we still start by getting this by itself. So what am I going to do first? Because I have to get rid of that -6. So how do I get rid of the -6? Plus 6. And then I have to get rid of that 3. I'm going to divide that. Okay, so now for a greater than, we do that completely different than a less than. We're actually going to make 2 different inequalities. So for my first inequality, all I'm going to do is drop the absolute value. So we have 4x plus 2 is greater than or equal to 5. But for my second one, I'm going to drop the absolute value, flip, and change. I do a drop, flip, change. So it's 4x plus 2 is less than or equal to. See, I'm flipping my inequality to a less than, and then make your 5 a -5. So you have to do 3 things to the second one. So now we're ready to solve it out. So in order to solve it, we're subtracting 2 and dividing by 4. X is greater than or equal to 3/4. Or you could say, if you don't want to deal with a fraction, you could say 0.75. So let's go ahead and graph that. 0.75 falls between 0 and 1. So put a closed circle. Let me zoom in over here. I'm putting a closed circle between 0 and 1. And then I'm drawing it to the right. That's half of my solution. Okay, so now we're ready to graph our second one to solve it. Let's go ahead and subtract the 2. Then divide by 4. So x is less than or equal to. Can somebody divide in their calculator? What is -7 divided by 4? What'd you get? -1.75. So we're going to put a closed circle between -1 and -2. So that's going to be about here. And this one goes to the right, to the left, sorry. So the main thing to keep in mind is notice how different your graphs look. When it's greater than, you have arrows going the opposite direction. and less than, it falls in between. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next one and do these last two, and then we'll end there. So the first thing you need to figure out is what kind of inequality is this? Is this a less than or greater than? So what do we have? Less than or greater than? Less than. So for less than, it's between. So you just have 4 minus 5x is less than 13. And then all you have to do is put another one on the other side. So we're subtracting 4. And that would be negative 17 is less than negative 5x, which is less than 9. Then we divide everything by negative 5. All right, let's pick up our calculators. Take 17 divided by 5. I think it's easier to graph it when it's a decimal. So 17 divided by 5 should be like 3.4. 3.4. We have to flip our inequality because we divided by negative. X. And then 9 divided by 5 is 1.6, I think. Negative 1.6. Did you write 1.8? Trying to do without a calculator. Okay. So this means that we're going to put a point at negative 1.8, which is basically negative 2. So we have an open circle at negative 2-ish, negative 1.8. And we also have one at 3.4. And then we connect it in between. Okay, last question. Greater than. So for the greater than, we're going to separate it. So my first inequality is 4x minus 7 is greater than 9. But my second one, I have to drop, flip it, make it negative. So we're going to add the 7. And then divide by 4. So x is greater than 4. Put an open circle on the 4 and go to the right. And then for the last one, we add the 7 again. (4x) is less than negative 2. Divide by 4, x is less than negative 0.5. So I'm going to put a point at negative 0.5, which would be here, and go to the left.